of slideshows and presentation on the theme, the woman and the seed in Genesis 3:15. Brother Miller.
I'd like to say welcome. Came all the way from New York, and we're really appreciative to be here and to share this with you. There's tours at the Metropolitan Museum of New York, of art in New York, and we're not going to give you the whole tour because that tour is about 3 hours. But we'll give you some highlights, and as was mentioned, it's based on a biblical scripture, Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15. And you might remember there that there's two organizations spoken of as being on the earth, and that right from the outset of human history, Jehovah was going to put enmity between those two organizations. We're going to be able to clearly see that from today's presentation. In fact, we'll go through parts of Egypt and Assyria and Babylon and Medo-Persia today. Now, we don't have any mics, but who can tell me from Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, which one of those is most closely associated with religion from what you know? Please, our sister. Babylon. So it's interesting because it's third in the succession of biblical world powers, but the Bible indicates that it affected all others. Anybody might want to give a gander? There's no wrong answers. Why is it third, and yet the Bible indicates that it affected all of the world powers? I'll give you a hint. Nimrod. What did he build? Please, our sister here. Exactly. So really, when the Bible talks about the seed of false religion, it's talking about Babel. And 1,500 years later, it became the world power, Babylon. So that's why it's third, but Babel actually preceded Egypt or Kemet, the first world power. Now, interestingly, we're going to see that, do you think Satan knew who the true woman and the true seed was when this prophecy was uttered in Genesis 3:15? Well, no, it was a sacred secret at that point. But he did know that that seed or that organization was eventually going to crush him in the head. But who did he think maybe it was? Because maybe he didn't have the accurate understanding. Well, probably Eve comes to your mind because the Bible was talking about a woman. She even thought that she was the woman. But clearly we know that she's not the true woman. What he does is he sets up false women and false seeds right from the outset of humanity to take attention away from the true woman and the true seed, and we'll be able to see that clearly today. So at this point, we'll kind of dim the lights and we'll start with the slide presentation. This is our first slide, and it's basically of old Egypt. As we were mentioning, the Egyptians didn't really call this land Egypt. It was the Greeks that termed it Egypt. We get our term from the Greek term Aegypto. But actually, you see that there's something wrong with this map, right? Lower Egypt is at the top, and Upper Egypt is a little further down. It's basically because of the flow of the Nile. So everything's kind of reversed. If you look at this section that says Lower Egypt, right up there by the Nile Delta, there's a personal name in the scriptures that actually would designate Lower Egypt or all those who were originally settled in Egypt. And the name is Mizraim. Now, I didn't know this until I started doing the research for the tours, but Arabic and Hebrew are both Semitic languages. So to this day, the proper name in Arabic for Egypt is Musur or Misr. And Misraim actually is in Hebrew. So you can kind of see that Misraim was the inception. A little further down, you have Upper Egypt. And here's another Insight book name. The Pathrusim or Pathros would correspond to Upper Egypt. And you don't see it on this map, but a little further down, you would have Nubia. And their capital was at Kerma. Now, a city in the Bible that would correspond to Kerma would be Cush, the Cushites, or even the Ethiopians. So all of these make up the world power Egypt, different sections, but we kind of understand a little bit better. Moving to our next slide, we're going to see things today from the Middle Kingdom, as is mentioned here, and also the New Kingdom. For you enthusiasts, you historians, 1943 BCE. Who crossed a famous body of water? A singular man? Exactly. Thank you. So he crossed the Euphrates in 1943 BCE. And just to give you an idea, in the New Kingdom, 1513 BCE, what happened there? Exactly, they came out. So Abraham crosses the Euphrates in the Middle Kingdom, they come out in the New Kingdom. We'll advance. Now this is the first thing you'll probably see if you come on tour. It's called the Tomb of Perneb. He was kind of a house administrator, and I don't know if you can see it fully here, but there's like a recessed door. And then you would actually go in. Here is the original location of that tomb. It's right under that pyramid. So it wouldn't have been above ground like you see at the museum. You would have had to go down. What is it right next to? You can yell out. That little, yeah. Well, actually, it's a pyramid. In Babylon, it's called a ziggurat. But you notice it doesn't look like pyramids that you know, right? Because eventually, this is actually an early one. It's called the Saqqara. It's the oldest freestanding structure still existent in the world today. And eventually, the Egyptians learned how to fill in the sides, and then they made a true equilateral triangle. Now, what do you think that triangular shape represented? It's a little informal, so you can yell out if you know. The Trinity, exactly. Triangular figure of the Trinity. So where would that Trinity then be? It's kind of like they got it from Babel. This is a true ziggurat. This is a representation of the Tower of Babel. And we've seen something similar even in our publications. Notice it has a tiered look also. And the Trinity in Egypt was Horus. Horus was the little baby, Ishtar was Isis was the woman, and Osiris was the male, but they got it from Babel, so in Babel the Trinity was Sin, Shamash, and Ishtar. Now, some of you might remember that these are actually the Mayan pyramids. Notice that they have a similar look. If you think about it, where did all of this start? Exactly, Babel. So it would spread out throughout the earth. And even in China, there are pyramids, and they normally have a tiered look, such as this. And they also are temples, because that's actually what the Tower of Babel was a temple. Here's another one, the same look. We kind of get the idea. Now here's the Trinity in Egypt that we were talking about, the middle one being Osiris, the one on the left being Horus, and the female there would be Isis. And this would be the Trinity out of Egypt, again, Sin, Shamash, and Ishtar. So early in man's history, they were worshiping in triads already. Here, actually, we got this from the museum, the Getty Museum that we went to yesterday. And you see even here in Cambodia, they were already worshiping in triads. And interestingly enough, what is this Buddha-like figure sitting on? A snake, somebody whispered it. Yeah, very well. So it's interesting when we start to tie the correlation, and we'll see that a little bit better as we go on down. Now, what might this be? Yes, it's an obelisk. Anybody know where it's at? Okay, there are some in New York or at Washington Monument, but this one is actually at St. Peter's Basilica. Now here's the one in Washington, D.C., the Washington Monument. It's the largest obelisk in the world. Now, when we think about that triangular figure that we saw earlier, the pyramid, all of these are the same. They're all phallic symbols. So it's interesting when you understand that, you might understand where do you see these triangular figures even today in architecture? Churches, exactly. So the church steeple. Interesting when you kind of know where the origin of these things are, you understand why you don't see them on kingdom halls. So two organizations on the face of the earth today, by their signs and symbols, they're showing you who they're truly aligned with. Another example of a steeple. And even in Islam, they have a rounded arch, but it basically is a steeple still. Anybody recognize this? Exactly. It's called an Ankh, A-N-K-H, and it actually is a fertility symbol, the circle corresponding to the woman. one part corresponding to the male, obviously, and then in Egyptology they say the crossbar represents the children or the union between the two. What letter, though, do you see in this symbol? G. Okay, somebody said G? Sounds like it, but a T. Now, in Babylon, or in Babel, who was worshipped under the Chaldean Tau symbol? Tammuz, exactly. Now, interestingly, Tammuz was supposed to be a regentrified Nimrod. He really wasn't connected with Nimrod. Nimrod married his mother. I know that's sick, but that's what, according to Akkadian and Semitic literature, that's what he did. He married mommy. Now, he died early, and she was kind of like a wayward woman, so after he died, she had a child, and she said, oh, Nimrod came back from the dead, and here's his little half-god, half-man baby, Tammuz. So although there's no connection between the two, Tammuz normally represents a regentrified Nimrod. Interestingly, what does this remind you of? A cross. Isn't it interesting that the cross predates Christianity by thousands of years? So when we tell people that Jesus did not die on such a structure, the cross was already a religious symbol well before Jesus or Yeshua ever came to this earth. Now, if in fact Nimrod and his mother were the prototype for something, anybody know what they were the prototype for? Okay, somebody said Mary and Jesus. Mother-son worship, actually. So here's an example of mother-son worship in Kemet. Here's Isis as the false woman, and her seed was supposed to be her son Horus. Looks strikingly familiar to the Madonna and Child. So again, mother-son worship and the cross predate Christianity by thousands of years. Here's another example of Isis nursing Horus. Now, it wouldn't be just in Kemet or Egypt, but we have Kuan Yin, a Buddhist goddess, and she's pictured here with a child. So it started in Babel, but it spread out. Xingmu in China was designated as the Holy Mother, and she too was, as you can see here, it almost looks like a little teddy bear, but it's supposed to be a child. In Buddhism, you have that little blue guy down there. His name is Krishna, and actually that's supposed to be Devaki or Devaka. I'm not sure, I'm not Hindu, what the pronunciation of the name, but there is the mother and child even in that section of the world. Anybody know why Krishna is blue? Somebody said he's sick. Yeah, he had a bad Happy Meal. Well, actually, because he's an avatar. So the director, yeah, I see you got it. Yeah, the director based that movie off of Hinduism, and so the creatures are blue. Remember the Smurfs? My father wouldn't let me watch it, and I was like, the Smurfs, are you kidding? But I look back now, and I'm like, wow, they were blue. And even in Aladdin, the little blue demon. So although we're not Hindus, we've been taught parts of Hinduism through entertainment. So we start to see how we have to be a little careful sometimes. Again, Krishna, the little blue baby. And again, here he's represented as an avatar. He almost looks feminine, but that's supposed to be a male. This is the Hittite goddess, Ariana, and she's pictured with a child. So by now, we're starting to clearly see that mother-son worship was on earth well before Jesus ever came to the earth. So what did they do with it? Exactly. They turned it into a Christian thing, and who became the woman? Mary. So Mary worship really is nothing more than mother-son worship. It's something pagan that has been Christianized. Examples of it all around the earth, because it's spread out, so you see examples all around. Where else would you see the Ankh today? Exactly. The priests and the popes, they wear it around their neck on what they call the chasuble. Interesting, a Christian organization wearing a fertility symbol out of Kemet or Egypt. Two organizations on the face of the earth by their signs and symbols, they're showing you who they're truly aligned with. Now, before we move on, who is the prototype for mother-son worship? Nimrod and his mother-wife. Yes, I call her mother-wifey. Her name is actually Semiramis. If you want to look up her in our publications, you'll see that the Bible doesn't name her, but ancient Jewish literature, Semitic literature, names her. Now, how would you describe this guy? Mm-hmm. Somebody said scary? Okay. Go to the next one. Maybe the next slide will help you out. So, exactly. He's a slave. He's a Kemetic prisoner or a prisoner in Egypt. As you can see from the back. Now, this picture might make a little more sense to you. Who is this? And where was he a prisoner? Exactly. So, the art department down at Bethel might take 6 months to a year's worth of research before they release something like this. They actually find out how Joseph would have been bound as a prisoner in ancient Egypt or Kemet. They just don't say, just draw Joseph bound. They do all this research. Why would that be important? Exactly. Because if someone knows, then they might say, they didn't get it right. And if they doubt the picture, what else do they begin to doubt? Yeah, the commentary or the text. So our pictures actually teach. Let's see if we can go to the next slide and figure out, do you recognize anything on this table? Exactly. Somebody mentioned a headdress right over there in the right-hand corner. If we go to our next one, you'll notice the Bible Stories book, Pharaoh is there using it. It's kind of right under his head if you can kind of make that out. This is actually an elaborate headrest. It's the headrest of Tutankhamun or King Tut, and it's actually a religious symbol. I'll give you a little hint. The head goes down on it in the evening, comes up in the morning. So what is it connected with? Sun worship. Exactly. So when we talk about paganism, we're talking about sun worship. There are 3 Abrahamic religions, as they call them on the face of the earth: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, where there's one central God figure. In all other traditions, as some call it, what is the case? Trinity, or a multiplicity of gods. So you have monotheism as opposed to polytheism. Who's being worshipped in polytheism? Many. Who are the many? Satan and the demons. So in the Abrahamic religions, you have one central God figure, but in all other structures, it's interesting that they're rarely monotheistic. Now, remember the tomb of Perneb? This is another tomb, a representation, but you notice that this door is sealed up. Anybody have any idea why they put doors on tombs? Exactly. They believed that the dead person would come out. In Egypt or Kemet, they called it the Ka, K-A, and they believed that your Ka would become reactivated and it would come through that door. So what would they leave outside the door? Food, yeah. Give the Ka a happy meal. So he comes out, he wakes up, he's hungry like you are in the morning, and he eats. Now, is that idea strange to us? What holidays in this country are based off this idea of the dead communing with the living? Halloween. When does Halloween take place? 31st. Yeah, October 31st. Anybody know what event in Bible times corresponded with that same time of year? Exactly, the flood. So what are these great festivals of death? And normally they happen around that time of year, all around the earth. What are they actually commemorating? Exactly, the death of the Nephilim, or the children of the demons. So when we place these things together, we kind of get an understanding of this. In fact, even when the conquistadors came to what is now Mexico, they found the local people doing this ceremony. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Day of the Dead, exactly. They couldn't get rid of it. They tried to stamp it out. So what did they do with it? They Christianized it, and what did it become? Right, All Souls Day and All Saints Day, which happened on November 1st and November 2nd. So we kind of see how with certain so-called Christian religions, when they couldn't stamp it out, they just kind of changed it and made it so that the people who weren't used to Christianity could worship the same way in the Christian form. Now, first world power again, but they already believe that you will not die. Interestingly, here is the tomb of Mequetre. Where is his tomb located? The side of a what? A mountain. Why did the people of Kemet put their dead in inaccessible places? I'm not hearing anything now. What were they trying to protect? Yeah, the body. Now, they did have a lot of jewelry and different things, wealth that went with the body, but actually the major thing for them was the person's ka, or actually their body. And so now we understand why they mummified people. What they actually used to do is dip the person in natron, which is a naturally occurring salt, and they would leave them there for about 40 days. And that's why they look gnarly, because it has the effect of drying all the moisture out. But the people of Kemet believed if there was no body, the ka had no home to come back to, there goes your afterlife. So they always mummified people so that the ka would have a place to return. These are not toys. They actually put these in the tomb, and such boats were found in Mequetre's tomb. Why do you think they put scenes in the tomb? Yeah, well, early on, if you were unfortunate enough to be part of the Pharaoh's entourage, you got buried with him. But then they got the bright idea of putting in these figures so that live people didn't have to go in. And when your ka reawakened, it could interact with them. This man Mequetre actually had boats like this in life, so here he's seen having boats like this in death. Again, this idea came out of Babel, this, you're not going to die. So even in China, or actually in Japan, what did the emperor do? Anybody know? Exactly, he had an army of soldiers, little figurines that was buried with him, so he could have his army in the afterlife. So again, it started in one central place, and we see variations of that theme all around the earth. Anybody know what this is called? Exactly. That's a Greek term, because remember, the Greeks ruled over Egypt for a while. Remember Ptolemy and that whole period? Now, anybody know the literal meaning of sarcophagus? Think Pac-Man. Yeah, it's literally a flesh eater. That's what the name sarcophagus means. Why did the Greeks call this a flesh eater?
Because they would put the body in it.
Yeah, deterioration. You come back, no body, so flesh eater. Now, you might notice that little scarab-like creature right there in the center. We'll talk about him a little later. On the top or reverse of this tomb, this is like the lid. If this is a sarcophagus, who does this represent? Exactly, the dead guy, right? What does he have now? So he's not, okay. Well, he's still supposed to be human, but he's dead. Well, actually, maybe you're right. He probably isn't human if he's dead. But he's not dead. And what do you see above his head? A sun disk, a circular solar disk. And that means that he now has become a god. Whenever you see that, even if you see a bug under that solar disk, it means that the people of Kemet worshipped him as a god. So you're not dead, and you're going to be like God. What does that remind you of? Exactly. So it's already part of their base religious structure. So when we use the term demonic teaching, are we exaggerating? No. They didn't come to these conclusions on their own. They're being led and taught, even as people may not know about an avatar. But if you look it up, it's a Avestan word. It's a Hindi word that actually means the manifestation of a Hindu deity. We look at this. This is a funerary stela or stele. Who's in the middle? Pharaoh. Do you know who's on the side of him? Exactly, Anubis. Where do wild dogs hang out? Exactly. So they did the same thing thousands of years ago. Yeah, he's offering. And I neglected to tell you this before. The Ankh is a fertility symbol, but it's also a hieroglyph. Anybody know what it means?
It means life or death.
Yeah, life, actually. It translates into life. So what are the gods offering to the Pharaoh?
Life.
Wow. Do you get it? You don't need the other guy, do you? We can give you life. Now, Anubis, it's funny, I was giving the tour one day and I came home and I wanted to relax, and I used to like Stargate. So I lay down, I turn on the TV, and out came Anubis. You see how subtle it is? I watch that all the time, but I had to come right home from the tour after talking about Anubis to see. So again, we're not saying you can't watch anything, but we have to be careful because there's a lot of teaching going on. Now, that's the dog-like guy. Anybody know who the guy is on the other side? The little bird? Horus, yes. Horus or Amun-Ra. They both were sun gods. Over time, they condensed their pantheon. So Horus or Amun-Ra is offering life to the Pharaoh. Here we see a close-up picture of Anubis. Another picture of Anubis. Now, where might you see something like this? Video games, or it's actually Japanimation, or that whole thing. Anime, yeah, exactly. Would we let our kids play with Anubis? Wow. Well, we'd have to be careful because Anubis isn't actually like Superman or Batman. He's not figments of somebody's imagination. If you go online right now, you will see that there's a temple of Anubis. I'm not saying you do this, but if you go there, you will see. And people have been worshiping him for thousands of years. It's kind of similar to a few years ago when the Prince of Persia came out as a game. I said, they can't really be talking about the same thing. So I went online and I looked up like the little description of the game. And it actually says you can battle with the Dark Lord. And I said, it is the same thing. Do you see why we have to be careful? See, inadvertently, our children become desensitized to occultic things. And after a while, we can't turn the tide back. So we have to be careful. So again, you see Horus offering the Ankh or life. If you can look at this slide and tell me, where is the Ankh normally offered to on the body? The nose or the mouth. They actually called it something that we are familiar with. What did they call it when they offered the Ankh to the mouth? What was being offered? What kind of life? The breath of life. That's actually what they called it. So again, two organizations. Notice how Satan sets up a mimic organization to do everything that Jehovah says he's the only one that can do. So you see that, again, a similar picture. This is the symbol of Horus, this falcon-like bird. What does he have above his head? Sun disk. So we know that he's worshipped as a deity. And this, anybody recognize it? Okay. It's the Egyptians called it the winged sun disk, and it actually is a symbol of Horus. Interestingly, if you go back on your wall there in the Kingdom Hall, you probably can find it. No, not right now. But after the presentation is over, you'll see that in early publications, they actually had a winged sun disk on. Now, interestingly, Charles Taze Russell was a good man, but you notice that we've had to be cleansed of a lot of ideas. We used to do Christmas and Thanksgiving and, oh, well, I don't know about Thanksgiving, but I think they did at one time do Thanksgiving at Bethel. But he actually thought that this was a symbol for Jehovah, because Jehovah called himself the Son of Righteousness, but the modern day organization has distanced itself because it's a little confusing. But again, the winged sun disk is a symbol of Horus. What's this?
Scarab.
A scarab. What's another name for a scarab beetle? Dung beetle, yeah. So you see that the Egyptians worship the scarab. You can see the scarab there has a sun disk above his at the top. And there's what the dung beetles do. They roll the little ball of poo into a circular sphere. What did the people of Kemet associate that poo ball with? The sun. Exactly. So they worshipped this scarab beetle as a manifestation of their creator. Because when he was rolling the little poo ball across the earth, they equated it with the sun being moved across the sky. And they didn't see anything go in, but they found it miraculous that little scarabs would come out of the poo ball. So it was like, oh, he's like a creator. So they worshiped him as a manifestation of their creator God. Interesting. What plague might this have been attached to? You got to name some bugs. Wasn't the locusts. Wasn't the gnats or the frogs. Gadfly. The Hebrew word gadfly can be translated dog fly or dog beetle. So what was Jehovah forcing them to do, possibly with what they worshiped as their creator? Yeah, step on him. Can't say he didn't have a sense of humor. If we go back to Horus, what type of god was Horus? Okay, he had a bird, but what other symbol that we see with the wings? Sun. So what do we get from the sun? Light. So when darkness befell Egypt, who specifically was being humiliated? Horus. So he put his lights out. It's part of the notes. I'm not making this up. So each of the plagues was not just an inconvenience. It was to humiliate a particular deity of Egypt. And there were 10 plagues. So what was Jehovah actually saying? Exactly. And by doing it to 10 gods, what is 10 significant of scripturally? Completeness. So what was he saying? Yeah, I've humiliated all of your gods because I've taken these chief 10 ones. And so your whole system is inferior. So you can see how Jehovah was moving. Again, you see the eyes there. Those are called the eyes of Horus or the eyes of Amun-Ra. And they're normally on the outside of a tomb. The people of Kemet sometimes would lay the body in sideways and they'd have eyes on the outside of the coffin. What do you think that was for? Okay, you're a little ahead of me. But why did they put eyes on the outside of the tomb?
So they could see where they were going?
Well, it was to ward off evil.
Yeah.
So you ever heard somebody say, don't you give me the evil eye? That's in all cultures around the earth. In Italian and Spanish, and if you go to Greece, if you get a lot of people when they went to the international, they got off the plane and what did they give them? They gave them bracelets with the evil eye all on it. Now the brothers knew what it was, so they said, no, we don't want that. But one brother said you couldn't buy a gift without the evil eye being attached to it. So he had to buy the gift and actually clip it off because they would put it on almost like as a band. Interesting. You might have seen this. It's the Eye of Horus again. It's kind of like a stylized version that you would see on Egyptian tombs. Now we come to the all-seeing eye. Interestingly, the Masonic all-seeing eye is nothing but a version of the Eye of Horus or the Eye of Amun-Ra, because Freemasonry comes from Egyptology. If you oh, I hope you don't, but if you ever have the privilege of going into a Masonic hall, you will see that they have Egyptian gods all around. What is that Latin phrase that we notice under the pyramid with the eye? Can anybody make it out? Novus Ordo Seclorum. Anybody have a Latin background? Well, Spanish and Latin are a little different, but novus would be new. Yeah, exactly. So it's New Order, secular, New Order for the ages, but it's shortened to New World Order. Remember when we used to use that term? But we stopped. Do you understand why? Because it has Masonic overtones. When presidents talk about the New World Order, they're talking about something totally different. So if you go on Watchtower Library now and you type in New World Order, where will it take you? Well, actually, it takes you to the New Earth, because that's the term we use now, and actually it's more scripturally correct. So again, we see this. Why so much Masonic imagery on American money? Yeah, the founding fathers were Masons. George Washington, Ben Franklin, that's the people who started this country. And so it's interesting that all of this imagery is on the money also.
Are those arrows in the eagles, one of the eagles?
Exactly. And there's 13, which is another number symbolic of Freemasonry. That 13 is something that's very important to them. And when you understand the basis of America, you start to understand why even they have certain policies even toward Israel. It's kind of religious in nature. Now you're probably saying, hey, I like that. This is a wig. The women of Kemet used to flatten their hair and put wigs such as this on. And you see it here from another side. Notice what it has there in the wig, the little ornaments. Now you might understand this picture a little bit better. So again, nothing is just done. They didn't say give her the Bo Derek look. It's actually based off of history, because that's what the people of Kemet would wear in their hair, and especially the upper classes. This is a female, and she was a pharaoh. Anybody knows her name? Okay, that's a good guess. Most people don't know her name because they've recently discovered that she existed. The BBC had a special on Hatshepsut, and she actually was a female pharaoh. She was the daughter of Thutmose I. She married her brother, half-brother. Again, they did nasty stuff like that. Well, actually Hatshepsut, but she married Thutmose II, her stepbrother, and then he had a child by another woman, and that became her stepson, Thutmose III. Now, when Thutmose III was very young, his father died, so who stepped in and helped on the throne? Yeah, stepmommy. She ruled anywhere from 15 to 20 years, so why would that have made Thutmose III a little angry? She was stealing his shine, right? Although he might have been a co-ruler, she was kind of in the way. So I don't know if you can see it here, her statuary is kind of cracked up, because archaeologists had to piece her back together, because he actually smashed up all of her statuary and buried it. And by doing so, she is now the person that has the most statuary that's preserved, because they found it all in one place. She is the pharaoh with the most statuary. She has little circular orbs in her hand. She's kind of making an offering to the god Amun, as in Amun-Ra. Now, interestingly, the Bible doesn't say this, but Josephus, a Jewish historian, said it is likely Hatshepsut that withdrew Musa or Moses from the water. What does the Bible say? Who withdrew Moses from the water? Pharaoh's daughter. So she was a queen, Pharaoh's daughter. And it does make a little sense, because wouldn't she had to have authority to be able to withdraw him from the water in defiance of the Pharaoh's edict and bring him into the house of the Pharaoh and raise him? Plus, what did she name Moses? Silly question. Moses, right? Her father's name was Thutmose, and some places he's called Thutmosis. So it's possible she was naming Moses after her father, who was a very famous or prominent pharaoh. So while we can't say for sure, it does make some sense that Josephus names her, and she reigned before the Exodus period. As you see here, the museum has up some things showing about her importance, and actually she was a woman, and she led raids into Nubia. And unlike generals today, she didn't give orders from behind. She led her troops in, and she conquered, so she was a tough cookie. This is a sphinx of Hatshepsut. What does it remind you of as far as an animal? A lion. Where would you see such creatures today, even in architecture? Okay, in Greece, but even right here, where might you see a little lion-like creature? Libraries, yeah, public buildings, you see them at the entranceways, one on each side. Of course, the Sphinx was a big giant lion that protected. They even had a row of them that lined the entranceway. This is a Grecian sphinx. This was put on the grave. They're all the same things. The sphinx here, the one on the grave, the ones at entranceways, the ones on driveways. You ever go to somebody's driveway and you see two lion-like creatures at the end? They're all protectors. They're supposed to keep the evil out. That's why they're at entranceways. So that's why even today we see them at the entranceway. They're supposed to be keeping the evil out. They are the evil. This is some bling bling from ancient Kemet. Don't get excited though, because they're funerary vestments, which means, yeah, you only wear them when you're dead, so don't get excited. Those are actually toe caps. I thought they were finger caps at one point, but those are actually toe caps. So we're familiar with all of the gold that was in Egypt. A lot of times it was buried with people, the pectorals there that went around the chest. What about this thing here? What's that? A cow. Yeah, kind of reminds you of the golden calf. How do we know that it's a goddess? Sun disk right above the horns. Yeah. Her name is Hathor. She's actually a goddess. And she was a god that kind of signified that you were going to have a party, revelry. Remember when Moses went to the mountain? Took a little long coming down. Joshua met him and said, there's a noise of war in the camp. What did Moses say? He said, it's not the noise of war. It's the noise of revelry. Interestingly, 30 days after they came through the Red Sea, they built something similar to this, a god of their captors. And how did they try to justify it? Exactly. So a lot of them died that day. Because you can't see a manifestation of Jehovah's power such as that and then come out and call that Jehovah. So we have to be careful, because some things are unforgivable. Once we have enough evidence before us, it's just simply wrong to turn around and make certain conclusions. And so we see how the Israelites did that. This is another example of Hathor. You see she has little ears because she's a cow goddess. Another pictorial example of Hathor, cow goddess. Anybody know who this head is? Young boy king? Tut, yeah, Tutankhamun, or commonly called Tutankhamun. Interestingly, what was on the crown of the pharaoh? A snake. What was the snake associated with, or who was it associated with in Eden? Satan. But here in the first world power, it's a protector of the pharaoh. It's a symbol of wisdom. Do you see the paradigm or conceptual shift? So again, demonic teaching. People aren't arriving at these things on their own. They're being led or taught. So we see more examples of King Tut. Now, right behind him here, you'll see a hand. That's actually the hand of Amun, which was a chief god there. It's almost as if Amun is giving him blessing, this world leader. That's the message. Is that strange to us? No, because we're told that there are actually demon princes behind the world rulers even today, guiding and protecting them. So not a strange thing for us. Amun was also a god who had an animal. What animal was sacred to Amun? A ram. Yeah, a ram. And a ram is actually just nothing more than a male sheep. It took me a while to figure that one out. What were the Israelites told to do in 1513 BCE before they left Kemet with a ram? Yeah, they were to kill it, and what were they to do with the blood? Very well. Now, do you think that would have been easy to do in a place where Amun and the ram were a chief deity? So what were they being forced to do? Exactly. They had to make a decision. They had to show what side of the issue they were on. A deliverance was coming, but they weren't just going to slide up out of there. They had to show which side of the issue they were on. Now, if they didn't do this, what would happen? Their firstborn would have died. Interestingly, Amun was the protector of the firstborn in Egypt. So now we understand why Jehovah told them to take that animal specifically and slaughter it. It was showing them and the Egyptians who really was the protector. Here we see an example of Horus. Again, Horus is supposed to be the son of Osiris or Osiris and Isis. Osiris is an Egyptian word that literally means seed. This is Horus, the son of the seed. What is he stepping on? Yeah, it looks like a crocodile, the museum says, and he's crushing serpents in his hand. The Insight book says this is a distortion of the Edenic promise. Again, this false seed is here shown crushing serpents and stepping on this reptile's head. Just keep that visual, because we're going to see that again, and even in a different world power. Interestingly, I think the name here is Quetzalcoatl, and he's being swallowed up by a snake. Just interesting imagery when you think about some of the things that it means. Here, of course, we all know what this is. And if we go to our next slide, who's represented in that circular part there? Well, it's supposed to be Jesus. What does he have behind his head? A sun disk. In Roman times, they lowered it behind the head, but where did it start out? Above the head in ancient Egypt, and it was a demonic symbol of divinity. It had nothing to do with Christianity. So you'll never see a halo in the watchtower because it really isn't Christian. Just to prove that, who has halos? The Buddha here is pictured holding a lotus flower with a halo behind his head. Another Buddha with a halo. Ganesha, I hope I'm pronouncing this right because I'm not Hindi, but you see him, you probably all have seen the little elephant god. He's got a stylized halo behind his head. Ganesha again. Here, I think this is Buddha again with a halo. What do you see halos here? He said everywhere. Yeah, Jesus, Mary, and the Father. And in Catholicism, actually one person is missing. Anybody know who she is? They say that Mary's too important to pray to, so they actually made someone up. She's not mentioned in the Bible, but her name is Saint Anne. And they call her the mother of Mary. So since Mary is too important, you pray to Saint Anne, and then Mary intercedes with her, Jesus with Mary, and on up to the Father. Jesus said the truth will set you free. Notice how convoluted that is. The Bible tells us there's one mediator between God and man. Who's that? And he that has not even been given the privilege to hear prayers. Only Jehovah does that. You can see how the truth is simple. What is this an example of? Yeah, mother-son worship. That's supposed to be Mary and Jesus, but who is it actually? Who? Yeah, Nimrod and his mother wifey, Semiramis. Now, you might not get that at first, but they were the prototypes for mother-son worship. Now, if you get a little closer, can anybody make out what she is stepping on? Snake. Is she supposed to step on the snake? Little ugly baby is, right? He's just being ugly. He's not doing anything. In mother-son worship, the woman always supersedes the seed. So even in Catholicism, who's more important than Jesus? Yeah. Again, it's on the earth well before Christianity. Another example of mother-son worship. If you get a little closer, you'll see that the baby is supposed to be holding the belt. Can you make that out? Read what the museum says that represents. Can anybody read that? Elevated? Ah, so what does the baby holding the belt mean? The mystical marriage of Christ and his mother. Did Christ ever marry his mother? Who married their mother? So that actually is the first false seed and a false woman that Satan set up, and people are still believing that they're worshiping God and his mother, but really it's Nimrod and Semiramis. Now here is something interesting. We have the Egyptian god Thoth, and he's actually doing something to this Roman Caesar. It's either Claudius or Nero, we don't know. Anybody can make out what's happening there? Yeah, water in the form of life or ankhs. So what would we call this? Baptism. Exactly. Is it a Christian baptism? But interestingly, this baptism predates Christian baptism. So Christian baptism is very specific. If you're not doing it the way the Bible designates, you're actually following the pagan way. Now, who does it this way? Enough said. Anybody know who this lady is the prototype? What she's the prototype for? Okay. She's actually a goddess Isis, and the Greeks called her Aphrodite, but it's the same goddess. She's the prototype for the Statue of Liberty. We've been told that the French gave the statue to America. It's a little bit erroneous. French Freemasons gave it to American Freemasons to symbolize the first 100 years of what they considered to be a Masonic republic. So the Statue of Liberty actually is a Masonic emblem. If you go back and do a little research online, you'll see that they laid her in a Masonic ceremony, even as they did this, the Washington Monument.
And Aphrodite was the goddess of love and beauty.
Exactly. Here's the Frenchman who made her. His name is Bartholdi. He actually was an Italian that lived in France for a while. And he, again, built it with Gustave Eiffel, the same guy who made the Eiffel Tower. Both very prominent Masonic people. Just do a little research on that and you'll start to understand the whole ramification. Yeah, I didn't even have to say anything. You figured it out, right? Pyramid with a stylized eye in it. Now this is a little interesting. You have a cross, but you also have a snake, and it's actually either eating a man or giving birth to a man. If you know about Mayan history, that's Quetzalcoatl. Actually, it's a symbol. There's a symbol that's very similar. What we showed you earlier with Quetzalcoatl, the snake, and he's either ingesting or giving birth to a man. The point is that a lot of logos are based in occultism.
I think he's giving birth because it looks like a cake with candy like somebody.
Okay, he's got a birthday cake, huh? I missed that one, but you're... Yeah. So we have to be careful. If you go to a society's work site, what do they tell you not to wear? Exactly, because most people don't even understand what they're wearing. It's very interesting. Sundisk with wings. And actually Bentley and a lot of people, now we're not saying you can't drive a Chrysler. We're just saying, again, spirituality is like having a light turned on in a dark place. You didn't know what was in the room with you until Jehovah turns on the lights and you see things differently now. What does she look like? Can anybody name an entertainment company that was headed by Masonic people? Okay, Columbia, that's their logo, but MGM, definitely Metro Goldwyn Mayer. What about the one that makes children's movies? Yes, Walter Disney was a very big Mason. Kind of helps people understand the demonism in Disney movies. One sister said she went to The Princess and the Frog. She took a young brother from the hall with her. And she had to walk out in the first 5 minutes. There was so much voodoo and stuff up top. She looked at the young child and she says, "You know why we have to leave?" And he shook his head, yes. But when we understand the history, we start to understand why there's that's present so prominently. Anybody know what that is? Yeah, you got it. Starbucks. Now, that's the old Starbucks logo. They tried to clean it up because people were offended by that. So they just cropped it a little bit, but we still know what it is. What did the Greeks call these twin-tailed mermaids? Sirens, exactly. So the idea is supposed to be the coffee is irresistible. Because remember, the sirens used to trap the sailors by singing to them. Then they'd kill them after.
In the Bermuda Triangle and stuff.
Yeah, luring them in. Even in Africa, they have versions of the twin-tailed siren at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Again, because this is nothing new. These are goddesses from the past. So again, we're not saying you can't drink Starbucks. Please don't say Brother Miller said that. But you start to become aware of how much satanic influence and thinking is all around us, even in the logos that we see every day. Just switching gears a little bit, anybody know who this guy is?
Looks like a Viking.
I'll just tell you. Sargon. Now, he's mentioned in the Bible only one time. And if you remember watching our video, many people said that Sargon was the reason why the Bible was false. Because for many years, they couldn't find any archaeological evidence that he existed. So they said, see, they made him up. There's no Sargon. But in 1843, they found his 25-acre palace in the sands of Khorsabad, or modern-day Iraq. So he not only existed, he had a big house. This is the palace of Ashur-nasirpal, another famous Assyrian. And his son, well, actually, Sargon's son, this is a little out of sequence. Sargon's son was actually, anybody know who another S name? Sennacherib. Interestingly, Daddy Sargon attacked the 10-tribe kingdom in the north, and he was allowed to do that. But Sennacherib tried to do the same thing in the south with the 2-tribe kingdom, wasn't able to do it. Why did Jehovah not allow Sennacherib to touch the 2-tribe kingdom in the south? Exactly. The Judean line of kings was in that southern kingdom, and so it wasn't because they were better. It's just that he was protecting the seed. Now, interestingly, Hezekiah was a good king, so when Rabshakeh, who was a appointee of Sennacherib, came against, anybody remember what Rabshakeh did? Yeah, he shouted taunts. He said, all these other nations, their gods weren't able to save them, so your Jehovah's not going to save you. You might as well just lay down now. What did Hezekiah do? He prayed, and he spread out the letters of what Rabshakeh was saying before Jehovah, and basically said, this is not about us, it's your name. What are you going to do? According to this woodcutter's print that's in the museum, what did the living God do? Yes, in one night. Divine protection? I think so. This is called The Woman at the Window, and it's a famous Phoenician piece. Actually, it's a fertility piece. They used to hang these on their bed. It was supposed to help them. I don't know, that probably would scare me and not help me. So these similar pieces here, the one in the middle and to the left, the women at the window. Interestingly, where would you see women at the window today? Exactly. They whispered it. Prostitutes. Now, in America, we don't have them at the window, so where would we see them at the window? Exactly, in Amsterdam. Over there, they put them behind like a glass front, and it's called the red light district, and you actually, well, not us, we shouldn't be. You choose it. It's funny because at the museum one day, I asked that question, and a brother, he raised his hand and answered, and his wife hit him and said, how do you know that? So, women at the window. And it just goes to show you that these were bed fragments, and they had to do with fertility. This is an alabaster jar. It has an imprint on it, and actually the imprint is, it's inscribed on it is Xerxes, the great king. In the Bible, what was Xerxes' name? He wasn't called Xerxes in the scriptures. Okay, that was his son. Good guess, though. Ahasuerus. Persian King Xerxes was Ahasuerus. So who was Ahasuerus married to? Esther. So what was the plot against the seed or God's people at this point? Exactly. And who was at the forefront of that? Haman. So here you see the museum says inscribed as Xerxes the great king. Anybody knows what these are? Okay, yeah. In New York, we have a lot of Jewish bakeries. So these are called Hamantaschen. Haman, Hamantaschen. It literally means Haman's head or Haman's ears. And the Jews still eat them today. They eat Hamantaschen on Purim. So interestingly, when we tie history together with what we even see today. This is from the time of Hezekiah, has a seal. It's actually what I call an old contribution box, because it's a jar, and they used to put contributions in the jar, and then it was sent to administrative centers, one such being Hebron.